Hello.
Oh.
Hola, how are you, sir?
I'm very good. How are you guys doing?
Very well, very well.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Sir, thank you so much for your time, for have you here with us is awesome. It's an
Oh,
honor.
my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
And I am Davide.
I am Francesco.
And I'm Massimiliano.
Very nice to meet you guys.
Thank you so much. I am the guy that asked you on Twitter for many times. Sorry for sorry, but it's wonderful to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I'm start with one of the most beautiful series ever made for me. It's Spartacus.
Oh, thank you.
I love Spartacus. And how did you come up with this brilliant idea? How it starts?
You know, that's an interesting story. I was working on an American TV show called Dollhouse for Joss Whedon. And I was a consulting producer on that. I was writing and directing. And I got a call from my agent who said, Sam Raimi and Stars want to do some Gladiator series. And I didn't know it was Spartacus when I went into the meeting. When I went into the meeting, Sam wasn't in the meeting, but his producing partner, Rob Tappert, was on the speakerphone because he lives in New Zealand. And they pitched me, you know, they wanted to do Spartacus, and they wanted to do the whole thing on stages with the backgrounds being CGI, very much like Zack Snyder did with 300. And the idea was, can we do something that cool and that beautiful on TV? And my first thought was, oh my God, I'd love Stanley Kubrick and Kirk Douglas's film. I've loved it since I was a kid. And the thought of trying to do something to stand up to that was very daunting. But I didn't even get that far in the first meeting. Here's the funny thing. They offered me the job in the room, which is very rare. They said, great, we would like you to do it. Can you start Monday? And I said, no, I can't start for 2 months. I'm prepping an episode of Dollhouse that I'm directing. And they said, okay, sorry, we have to go now. So I left and thought, well, you know, I just can't do it. I'm busy. So about 6 weeks later, I'm on set, finishing up directing my episode of Dollhouse. And my agents came to set and said, hey, Stars called. They haven't found anybody they liked as much as you. Would you still be interested? And I said, yeah. So literally 2 weeks later, I ended editing the Dollhouse episode on a Friday, and I started Spartacus on a Monday. Here's the thing about Spartacus. I didn't know anything about Roman history. The only thing I knew was from films like Spartacus and Ben-Hur and stuff like that. So immediately I started reading up on Spartacus, and what I found was that there was so little known about Spartacus. Mostly it was who won this battle, who won that battle. There wasn't a lot of detail about his life, which gave me a lot of leeway. And I always credit Rob Tappert, Sam Raimi, and their producing partner, Josh Donnan. They actually sold the show to Stars before they found me. And they had the idea that they wanted to do Spartacus, kind of like 300. And then they needed to bring somebody in to figure out exactly what the story was. And that's where I came in. And the show was originally conceived as a male-driven action show, which it certainly has those elements. When I came in, my big thing was I wanted it to be a love story. I wanted it to be a love story about Spartacus and his wife. but also a love story about Lucretia and Batiatus, a love story with Crixus and Nebbia, a love story with our two gladiators who fell in love and ended up being two of the only ones that lived out of the gladiators. So for me, it was important that a love story was at the center of it. Much like in the movie Spartacus, there was a love story at the center of it. The other thing that I wanted to do, and I didn't say this out loud when I started, is I really wanted it to be a story about inequality, something that reflected the modern day. And I wanted it to be, because in the modern day, I felt, and this was 10 years ago, I felt like the gap between the very rich and the very poor was getting wider and wider and wider, and it was creating an economic slave class that basically lived and died at the whim of the super wealthy. So that was something that I wanted to portray in this show. And you know, it was very easy because that's basically what Spartacus is about. It's about the gladiator slaves rebelling against the rich Romans. So that's how it started. And then we threw ourselves into it. We got a couple of Roman PhD experts to help us out with all the history, and they were great. They provided us whenever we had a question. And there's a lot of stuff in the show that came directly from them. Things like the gladiators scraping off their dirt with olive oil, you know, that came from them. A very famous scene in the prequel where I think it was in the prequel where Batiatus goes into the town and there's the public restroom and he has the shit sponge. That's something I had never heard of. That's what they told us that was very common. And we're like, well, we have to put that in the show. And there were so many details that one of the biggest details that our Roman experts gave us is, before I started the show, I said, hey, this is an R-rated show. You know, it's a very adult oriented with a lot of nudity and sex and cursing and violence. So can you give me a list of all of the curse words that Romans would use in this time period? And they gave me a list that's all exactly the same words we use today. There's a Roman equivalent. And I was surprised because I said, oh, I thought I read that there were no curse words, you know, back then. And they go, no, that's throughout history, it's been sanitized, but there's a ton of graffiti, ancient graffiti on the walls that use all of these words. These are the equivalent. And it's funny because a lot of people watching the show, they kept commenting on, I love the show, except, you know, all the modern day cursing takes me out of it. And I had to keep saying, no, this is actually the words you use. You know, we made it more floral, like, you know, Batiatus has a lot of phrases like, you know, the gods once again spread cheeks and ram cock and ass, you know, things like that. So that's basically how I became involved. And the interesting thing about Spartacus is it was kind of a big experiment. Starz had never produced their own 1-hour drama. At that point, they had a show called Crash, adapted from the movie on, but it was produced by Lionsgate. So this was the first show that Starz produced themselves. And because of that, they gave Rob Tappert and myself a lot of leeway. We were basically able to do whatever we wanted. So Rob and I, early on, we talked about, you know, who do we want to make this show for? Who's our target audience? We know because it's gladiators and bloodshed that the young male audience will watch, but who beyond that is our audience? And we decided we don't care. We just want to make a show that we want to watch. So that's really how we approached it. We made a show that excited us, and that seemed to work because we were just interested in telling a good story, not, you know, using algorithms or anything to figure out how to make the show. We just wanted to feel the show. And that's what we did. And I always say the first couple of episodes are so-so until we figured out really how to write the show, and the actors figured out exactly how to say the dialogue, because it's a little complicated. And we were also using a New Zealand crew, and a lot of them had worked on shows like Hercules and Xena, which I love, but Spartacus is very different. So it took a few episodes for even the crew to figure out, oh, this isn't Hercules and Xena. We're doing something a little bit different. And yeah, so that's the background on how Spartacus started. I'm still shocked we were able to do what we did. It was such a rare moment in time, and such really one big experiment.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah. Well,
Thank you.
Since you talked about the start of Spartacus, I wanted to ask me and my friend of mine, Paul. We wanted to ask him. In 2013, there were rumors about a spin-off, a Spartacus spin-off about Caesar, but sadly things never came to be. And is there any hope for fans to look forward to a comeback for you in the future in the Spartacus universe, or maybe?
Yeah, interesting. The Caesar spinoff, we always talked about doing the triumvirate with Pompey, Caesar, and Crassus, because it's such a fantastic story.
Yeah.
I was busy on another show that I was working on for Stars, and Rob Tappert and another writer came up with a concept, and I told them, you have my full support, go do it. I'm tied up, but do what you want with the story. And they developed it with Stars, and unfortunately the show just didn't go. So I wasn't involved in that one, but they had my full support. I've been, on Twitter, I'm asked every week, give us more Spartacus. Where's the Caesar spinoff? For me, it's hard because I worry that I won't be able to capture that magic again. Because the show was so specific to where we were making it at the time, our executives at the time. I could never do the show without Rob Tappert. Rob Tappert was absolutely the unsung hero of Spartacus. And just so you know, Rob Tappert was the producer in New Zealand. He oversaw everything, and there's so much of his DNA in the show. The look, the feel, everything he was involved with. I never could have done the show without him. The show would not have been as successful without Rob. So to start with, I would never, ever, ever try to revisit the world without Rob Tappert. Just could not do it. It would not be the same. I'm not saying I would never revisit the world, but it's tough because there's just, I would always worry that it wouldn't be as good as Spartacus. And I would never want to give the fans something that we were doing just for money or, just to make another show. I just loved the show too much, and I respect the show too much.
Thank you.
Yeah, and let's talk about the role of the producer. In your long career, you have covered many times the role of producer. And tell us about this role and how important it is for the final product. And maybe the person, the public don't think how is important, and maybe how is creative this figure.
Yeah, it's, producer is an interesting word because there's kind of like two kinds of producers.
Yeah.
There's on the writing side, when you're writing television, you go up through levels. You start as a staff writer, then you get promoted to story editor, then executive story editor, co-producer, supervising producer, co-executive producer, executive producer. So when you get up to basically, and you know, there's producer in those middle levels, and that's actually just a title to tell you how much experience you have. But in those roles, you tend to start to be in editing more, you're on set more, at least theoretically. When you get up to executive producer, so all showrunners are executive producers, but not all executive producers are showrunners. You can be an executive producer and not run the show. That's very common. So like for me on Spartacus, I was an executive producer and I was the showrunner. So that means my job is to make sure the scripts are written, the stories are broken, the scripts are delivered on time, within budget. And I'm also, you know, giving notes and editing, and I'm involved in casting and all of that stuff, you know, the look of the show. There's also the physical producer, like Rob Tappert. Rob Tappert, he kind of covers all those areas. Because he's not just a physical producer, he's also a creative producer. He was, you know, the other side of my brain. It's like we shared the same head. You know, we were constantly working on the show and striving to make the show better. There's also something called a line producer, and the line producer is there making sure all the physical elements of the show are in place. You know, making sure all the schedules are correct, all the departments have what they need, keeping an eye on the budget. So all those elements together, for me, the writing executive producer / showrunner, the creative producer like Rob Tappert, and the line producer, all of those producing titles combined help make a show. As you know, making a show is incredibly complicated. You have hundreds of people. It's incredibly difficult and time consuming. There's always things are going wrong all the time. One side story about things going wrong. There's an episode in season 1 of Spartacus, I think it was episode 6, where Spartacus's wife has been found and she's being returned to him in the ludus. It's right after he kills the shadow of death. And it's raining for the first time in months in Capua. So there's a lot of rain. Well, slight problem, we shoot everything inside on sets. So they had to figure out the drainage on the set so it could rain inside the set. So I'm on the phone with Rob one day and we're talking about notes, and he's pulling up to the studio in New Zealand and he goes, Steve, I gotta go. There's water gushing up out of the set 200 feet into the air. So something went wrong and water was shooting out the roof of the stage. And that kind of stuff happens all the time. We also, in the same episode, we had a minor problem. If you remember, Spartacus's wife, Sura, she arrives in the back of a slave wagon pulled by horses. If you go back and watch that scene, you'll notice that the horses in front, their yoke across them, you'll see that there's a cable tied to it that goes off screen. It's because the wagon was built so heavy, the horses couldn't pull it. So they had to put this cable on and have a bunch of guys off screen pulling it. We also built it so big, it had like a ½ inch on either side of the gate to get through because it was so big. So these kind of things happen all the time. And really, it's the producer on the ground that helps take care of that. And again, Rob Tappert, the show would not exist without Rob Tappert.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay. Sir, you direct Pacific Rim Uprising.
Yes.
Is a great sequel to a great movie. I really love. And how was this cinematic experience?
Tough. Very, very, very difficult. Look, it's no secret that I was not completely happy with the way the movie turned out, and there's many reasons for it. And this is not to disparage anybody that worked on the movie. The crew worked incredibly hard. The actors were just amazing. The producers were amazing. But sometimes things just have problems. And it's funny, if you ever, there's a series on Netflix called The Movies That Made Us. And if you ever get a chance to watch it, every great movie that we love was a disaster when they were shooting. There were so many problems when they were shooting these movies. And this was my first movie. It wasn't supposed to be my first movie. Backstory, I wrote a very, very small movie. It was 3 people in a house. It was a Hitchcockian thriller. And Mary Parent, the Uber producer, read it, loved it, and we set the movie up at Paramount. And it was an $8 million movie. Very, 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 very small. But Paramount was going through changes at the time, and it was hard to get traction on that movie. So we spent about 8 months trying to get it going, couldn't get it off the ground. And then Mary called me up one day and said, maybe this won't be your directorial debut. What do you think about Pacific Rim 2? And my first reaction was, well, I was planning on doing an $8 million movie, and this is a $150 million movie. So it's a little bit bigger. But I love the first movie. I'm a huge fan of Guillermo del Toro's work. I think he is one of the greatest living directors we have right now. And when somebody says, do you want to direct a $150 million giant robot monster movie? Of course you say yes. So usually it takes about 3 years to make a big movie. It takes about a year of prep, year and a half of prep. And then you're usually shooting for anywhere from 6 to 9 months on a big movie. And then you spend the rest of the time in post and doing visual effects. So I sign up for the movie, and a week later, they tell me, because of schedules and everything, we have to release this movie in 2 years instead of 3. So we lost a massive amount of prep time. So we were always scrambling on that front. So we wrote a script very quickly, and this was a script that starred Charlie Hunnam as Raleigh Beckett from the first movie. It was basically him and Herc Hansen were now co-piloting Gypsy Avenger. So we wrote the whole movie. Everybody loved the script. And the next day we heard Charlie Hunnam is doing a remake of Papillon that's shooting at the same time we are. So we lost Charlie Hunnam. And Charlie Hunnam, I had lunch with him. Fantastic guy. I loved him. Would love to work with him. And Papillon was his passion project that he was trying to make for years. So I totally understood. Unfortunately, we had a release date, so we had to shoot. Yeah. So we went through a couple of more variations of the script, and then Mary Parent said, what do you think about John Boyega as Idris Elba's son? And I said, I love John Boyega. I loved him in Attack the Block. I love him in the Star Wars movies. But, you know, he's got Star Wars. I don't know if he would do this. So Mary had him come by the office for a general meeting. And she had us put all the concept art for Pacific Rim Uprising up in the conference room and showed it to him. And it turns out he was a huge anime fan. He loved the idea, so he signed on. So we quickly rewrote the script, myself and a wonderful team of writers, to retool it for John Boyega's character. And then we had to start shooting. And that's really where the problem starts, I think, with the movie. And there's a lot of things I love about the movie. Also, by the way, if you haven't seen it in 3D, it's one of those movies that's way better in 3D, way better. It's just a lot more fun in 3D, which shocked me, but it is for some reason. So because we had to start shooting, the script was still, we were still working on the script, and that's very common. Again, if you ever watch the movies that made us, it's like so many movies start shooting without a script being done. But we had a script, but we were still working on stuff. But the biggest thing in a movie like this is the previs. And for those who don't know, the previs is a rough computer animation of what happens with the visual effects. And because Pacific Rim deals with these giant Jaegers, these giant robots with people inside them, if you're shooting the people inside them, you've got to know what the robots are doing outside so you can have the motion match. Well, one of the problems is we didn't have enough time to really finish doing the previs completely. So there are sections of the movie where when I'm shooting what's going on inside, I don't 100% know what's going on outside. So we had to kind of guess. And it's funny, if you watch the movie, there's a big battle in Sydney. There's a big battle in Sydney. And that was the first really con pod inside the cockpit of the Jaegers that we shot. And if you look at that stuff inside the Jaeger, and then if you look at the stuff inside the Jaegers at the end battle in Tokyo, you'll see they feel very different because I was learning how to shoot inside these things. And so was my camera department. So by the time we got to the final battle, we're like, okay, we can do this and move the camera this way, and this will feel like that. So that got better. It's always tough doing a sequel, especially if you're trying to follow someone like Guillermo del Toro, whose style is just, I love his style. I love his work so much. So it was a long story, very long. It was very tough. It was a long shoot. It was a difficult shoot. Again, I think everybody I always say, when you see a movie or a TV show that doesn't quite feel like it works, I guarantee you the people working on it work 10 times harder than something that did work. Because I always feel that for things that I don't think completely work, I've worked way harder on trying to get them to work than stuff that was a success, which is always the weird paradigm in Hollywood. But all of that said, there are parts of the movie that I really love, and I wouldn't trade that experience for anything. It was such a fantastic experience to travel around the world to shoot, and around the world for the premiere, and also just the people that I met that made the movie were so spectacular. John Boyega, I love him to death. He's a wonderful human being. And there was a young actress, this was her first movie, Kaylee Spaney, who has gone on to great success. I actually tried to get her to do some other stuff, but she was too busy because everybody wants her now. So that was the movie. It was a crazy, incredibly tough, incredibly wonderful experience.
Thank you.
Speaking about this kind of experiences, there's rumors going around that Charlie Cox's Daredevil might join the movie side of the MCU. So I, as a big longtime fan of Daredevil and your input in the show, your first season, how was it to tackle such an iconic character? How did it feel? What's your take on the experience you had on the set?
Again, very difficult, very difficult. But the thing about Daredevil is I was still under my contract at Starz. I had developed a big sci-fi show called Incursion that turned out to be a little bit too expensive to make. So I was working on some other ideas for them. When I got a call from my old friend, Jeff Loeb, who was the head of Marvel Television, I had met Jeff years ago when Joss Whedon was trying to put together a Buffy animated show. Jeff was running the animated show, and we did a bunch of scripts for him, and we always stayed in touch. And I know my dear friend Drew Goddard, who I could not love more. He's one of the most brilliant writers and wonderful guys. I worked with him on Buffy, and then I worked with him on Angel. And we actually wrote a bunch of scripts together on Angel. Daredevil was his show, and he was working on it with Jeff and a room of writers. But Drew had a pre-existing contract with Sony to write and direct the Sinister Six Spider-Man movie. And I'm very sad that that never went. Once Sony and Marvel figured out how to use Spider-Man together, that movie was dropped. So Drew had to go off to work on the Sinister Six Spider-Man movie, and they needed somebody to come in and take over. So they called me up, and I said, guys, I'm making a lot of money just sitting at home thinking. So I don't really want to go off. And, you know, I love Marvel Comics. I grew up reading Daredevil and Punisher and, you know, Heroes for a Hire with Luke Cage and Iron Fist. So Marvel was a great love of my life, and it still is. And they said, well, just come in and hear our pitch. So as a favor to them, I went in and heard the pitch, and they pitched it to me. And afterwards, I remember saying, God damn it, now I want to do it. This is terrible. This thing was so good that I couldn't say no. So I said, okay, let me talk to Stars about getting out of my contract early. So I did that, and I jumped right in. And again, we had very, very little time because we had to start shooting. We had a very hard start date because it needed to be released at a certain time. So Drew Goddard had already written the first two scripts, and I just did a very, very minor polish on them for what we were doing later. And then we just dove in to working on the rest of the scripts. And thankfully, it had already been decided we were shooting in New York, because there was some talk about shooting in Toronto, and I love Toronto, but New York looks very specific. And as I discovered, it's very difficult to shoot in New York, but it looks so good that it's great to shoot in New York. So we didn't have a cast yet. So we started looking, obviously, first and foremost for Matt Murdock, Daredevil. And this is where Joe Quesada, the famous Marvel artist, editor, and just a guru over at Marvel came in. He had seen Charlie Cox in something years ago, and years before even the Daredevil show started, he was telling people, I found the guy that needs to play Matt Murdock if we ever do Daredevil. So we brought in a bunch of people. Charlie was one of them, and he was brilliant. And I'll never forget Charlie's audition, because it was not right for the character, but it was brilliant. He played Matt Murdock kind of like Rain Man, that there was so much information coming in that he was very withdrawn and almost autistic in his approach to people. And it was a brilliant performance. But afterwards, we told Charlie, that's brilliant, but not what we want. You know, Matt Murdock is a ladies' man, and he's, you know, he's very good with people. And Charlie was fantastic. He goes, oh, okay. He went away. He came back the next day, completely different performance that blew us away. He was fantastic, really fantastic. But he was also very skinny at the time, because he really didn't go to the gym a lot. You know, he exercised, but not with weights. So we immediately put him we put him with a trainer and put him on a weight program. I think he had something ridiculous, like 6 weeks he had to get into shape. And it's amazing, because when you see him in episode 1, that's him with 6 weeks of weightlifting. And he looks incredible. He's got abs and muscles. He looks phenomenal. But that was our first big piece of casting that we knew we needed. And the next big piece of casting, of course, was Wilson Fisk, Kingpin, which is very, very, very difficult role, because he's supposed to be, you know, huge. And you need somebody that's really big, really physically imposing, and a great actor. And I started yelling, Vincent D'Onofrio, we need Vincent D'Onofrio. Because I found a picture of him on the internet with a shave. And I was sending the picture to everybody. Look, it's the Kingpin. And everybody told me, there's no way we're going to get Vincent D'Onofrio. He's too expensive. He's not going to do it. But thankfully, our casting director, Lorraine Mayfield, she knew Vincent. And she said, well, let me reach out to him. And it turns out Vincent was a huge Marvel Comics fan, huge Spider-Man fan, loves the role of the Kingpin. So he came on board and to all of our shock and delight, agreed to do it. And I think, you know, those two casting choices really, really made the show. And the other two vital choices that we made is we took a chance on a young cinematographer, Matt Lloyd. He had done a couple of small independent movies, but we really, really liked him. We really liked his look. So we gave him a chance on Daredevil. And that's why the show looks so beautiful. His cinematography is fantastic. And he, of course, went on, you know, he shot the last Spider-Man movie, Far From Home. So he's another one that I keep wanting him to come work with me, and he's off doing Spider-Man movies, so he's too busy and I can't get him. The other incredible talent we brought in was our stunt coordinator, Phil Severa. And this was another guy. This was his first big, you know, running the whole stunt team, but we loved his stuff and we loved him. And that's why, you know, the action in it is so good and grounded, particularly, you know, that scene at the end of episode 2, the infamous hallway fight. That's one long take. Drew Goddard had written that in his script as, you know, this is all one long take. And then later when we were done with it, he told me, I never thought you were actually going to do it. He was surprised. So they spent a lot of time trying to figure out, how do we do this? What they came up with was absolutely brilliant. One, the fight choreography is brilliant, but how they figured out how to shoot it, with Phil Abraham, the director, and Matt Lloyd and his camera team, and Phil Severa, they all came up with this incredible idea that I'm still amazed by. If you look at the hallway during that fight, you notice it's too small for a camera guy to be in there. So how did we shoot it? Well, they built a track in the ceiling. The camera's on a pole, and the camera guys are on the roof of the set, moving the camera back and forth. And then after it's all done with CGI, we took out the track. So that's how that scene was shot, which was a brilliant solution since we couldn't get a camera guy in there. It was too crowded and too dangerous. But I remember when it took a full day to shoot that because they had to do multiple takes to get everything right. But I remember seeing it in dailies when they were done, and I was just blown away. I thought, man, this is something really, really special. And yeah, that whole show was just a joy to work on, because everybody that worked on that show, you know, from the crew, the costume departments, the writers, everybody loved Daredevil comics and loved Marvel. And so we all wanted to really make the best show we could based on that character. And it was such a joy to work on that show.
Amazing. Thank you so
Wonderful.
much. Thank you for
And let's talk about, I think you're one of the last work of you, Jupiter's Legacy on Netflix.
Jupiter's Legacy.
Yeah, I know that you are not for all the series, for all the season, but
yes, I can't say a lot about Jupiter's Legacy. When Chris and I parted ways, there were legal agreements signed that I really can't talk about. I can tell you, I can tell you all the positive things. loved all the actors, loved the writers, everything. Look, it was a hard show. It was a big, very expensive, very complicated show. And, look, sometimes there are creative disagreements. Sometimes studios and directors and writers don't see eye to eye. And unfortunately, this was one of those times. But again, everybody worked so hard on the show. Everybody wanted the show to work. And sometimes things don't work. I will give a special shout out to Liz Wolfe. Liz Wolfe was our costume designer. And the costumes that she put together for this show were just gorgeous and spectacular.
Yeah, amazing.
Especially Josh Duhamel's costume as the Utopian, which is very hard to do because it's an all-white suit, but she figured out, her and her creative team figured out how to do it. And I remember every day when I would get these designs from her and her concept artists, it was like Christmas for me, because I just love seeing that kind of concept art. And those suits, I got to tell you, those suits are not only hard to design, they are so difficult to make. Really, really, really hard to make. And Liz and her team just experimented with all kinds of fabrics and designs and process. And in fact, she designed for the Flair 2, the daughter of Fitz, who's in the wheelchair in the show. They experimented with a new way to make these costumes. They reached out to sneaker tech companies, because they have these ways now of printing the sneaker tech to put the sneakers together. So she did a lot of research and teamed up with a company. So the Flair 2's costume is built using this printing technology. Which I wish we had it at the beginning of the show, when we could have made more of the costumes that way, because it turned out so incredibly detailed and cool.
Yeah.
And it's just like that next evolution of costume designs. And I always, again, hold Marvel up as some of the best costume design out there on the feature side and on the TV side. Their designs for their costumes, I mean, I really never thought growing up reading comics that I would see characters like, Vision and Thor and Iron Man and all of them look so good on screen.
Yeah.
And they continually just make it's such a high standard that they have.
Yeah, absolutely. The show, anyway, is amazing.
Oh, I appreciate it. Like I said, everybody worked very hard, and kudos to everybody that continued working hard after I left the show. It's always very difficult when the showrunner creator leaves for whatever reason, and everybody carried on. And especially much love to the actors. I absolutely loved the actors on the show, and I thought Josh Duhamel did amazing work. He's such a fantastic guy, and damn good looking, I gotta say.
yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I don't know if we have time for a last question.
Sure, let's have one more.
Yeah. Okay. Was there a movie you saw that made you say, yes, I want to be a writer?
Oh, God, so many. But going back to it, like I'm a kid. I was born in 1965. So I'm really a child of the 70s and 80s. So Star Wars for me came out when I was 12 years old. And it was the perfect time. I remember the first time I saw it in a theater, and it just blew me away. It was unlike anything I had ever seen up until then. And I think there was a lot of things before that. Like I loved the old King Kong movie. I love the old Ray Harryhausen movies. All the Sinbad movies, and particularly Jason and the Argonauts. Yeah, with the skeleton battle that still amazes me to this day. But I think it's when Star Wars hit that it really, really started to get to me that I wanted to work in movies and television. It just swept me away like so many other people from my generation. It was a defining moment at the theater. And there have been many since. Movies like Raiders of the Lost Ark, Brazil, The Matrix, all of these movies. And of course, Terminator Judgment Day. There's so many fantastic movies, but for me, it all goes back to that first Star Wars that really started me on my journey and my love of cinema.
Oh, same for me. I love Star Wars, Back to the Future.
Back to the Future.
I really love.
Back to the Future came out right before I went to college. And oh my God, I loved it so much. That's another one. If everybody out there, if you haven't seen the movies that made us on Netflix, you got to watch the Back to the Future one. It is just so amazing how much changed from when they started the movie, from when they finished the movie, and just how brilliant the whole thing is.
Yeah,
it's amazing. And the first movie that I see at the cinema is Terminator 2. 8 years old.
That was amazing. I saw that when I was in college at UCLA. And, there are certain movies that push filmmaking forward in such a huge way. Star Wars was one of them, with the technology that George Lucas and ILM developed to make that movie. Terminator 2 was another one. It was just a huge step forward in what you could do with a movie. And then, The Matrix pushed it again further. And then, of course, James Cameron comes back with Avatar, pushes it further. It's things like that I truly love. I'm always fascinated by the technical side of filmmaking and how you can use the technical side to really make an emotional story. It's just, I honestly can't wait to see what's next, particularly with the Unreal Engine and how we can use that to help not only make the movies, but make them cheaper, which means make more of them, which is always the dream. I'm doing a lot of work with the Unreal Engine right now, which is just such an exciting future of filmmaking. So I agree with you. I am just constantly delighted and swept away by filmmakers and what they can do. And I think the most recently when I felt that is when I saw Mad Max Fury Road. I thought was incredible, and The Revenant, both in the same year, which was just absolutely stunning. Both of those movies are just technical marvels. And I always look at some scenes, like the other day, I have a 3D setup at my house, and I was watching scenes from Doctor Strange. And for those of you who've seen it, there's this whole chase through Mirror Manhattan where the whole city is changing. And watching that, putting on my director's hat, my first thought is, how do you even start to plan this? It's so complicated and it's so seamless. And, my hat's off to the directors that can make these super complicated technical things work so smoothly. And directors like James Cameron, of course, and Guillermo del Toro, and of course, the master of all masters, Steven Spielberg. It's just amazing to me what these people can do, and I'm constantly inspired by their work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Stop. This is, Guy, you have any question?
Max?
Well, if I could more, it was more a thank you for we're all big Snyder fans, and we wanted to thank you for your your support to the release of Snyder Cut movement.
Oh, of course. Zack Snyder is another director that I absolutely love and am inspired by, and of course, there would be no Spartacus without what Zack Snyder did on 300. And I loved the Snyder Cut. I thought it was beautiful and gorgeous and moving, and I can't wait to see what he does next. I often, whenever I'm doing any kind of big project, I always go back and look at some Zack Snyder stuff, like that fantastic fight in the street in Superman, Man of Steel. The super fight with Zod's minions is just a marvel. It's everything that, in Superman comics you read and you dream about seeing. And I just love his work, and I'm really excited to see what he does next.
Thank you.
Thank you. And last question, will you see in the future something new direct by you?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I have 4 or 5 movies in development. Everything from small to much larger. I love the movies. I would like to definitely do more movies. The movie business is always tricky and tough, and it's always changing, but I absolutely adore the movies. And you also see more TV stuff from me, but I'm definitely concentrating on movies at the moment.
Very good. Thank you.
I can wait.
Perfect.
Yeah,
That's
we can wait.
I can wait.
Thank you so much, guys. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you. Thank you also to Adam. Your assistant is very, very nice.
Yes, he is.
Thank you. And thank you to you. You are an inspiration for me.
Thank you.
I am a writer. I try to be a writer.
Yeah,
and
me
you are
too.
an inspiration. Oh, you are great.
Oh, thank you.
So thank you so much, sir. And
thanks, everybody. It's been a real joy, and we'll have to, when my next movie comes out, we'll have to do this again.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah.
Absolutely.
We are here.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Mr.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.